All right, how's everybody doing? We're going to go ahead and get started. I've got the course roll key there for enter that in if you haven't already. Everybody will make it up here, I guess, as they realize it's not down there if they didn't check their email. Or not.
Yeah.
Most of you replied. There's a few that didn't, so I think I did tell everybody to check their email. Well, tonight we're going to be meeting in here and then throughout the rest of the semester. And since Thursday is generally our lab time, we are going to have an in-class lab that we're going to do on your camera settings. We'll talk about in a second. But the contrast exercise, the take-home, we'll talk about before you leave. We're going to discuss, before we get into anything, this very top document. I'm not going to print it out, but you can view it on your computer at home or on your tablet or laptop or desktop. It's a bunch of terms for digital photography, which I'll have a quiz about this next week. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to have the quiz for this next Tuesday. And I will email everybody reminding you of that. So let's open that up real quick. Okay. This is just terms, and you'll go over these terms however you want to study them. You can study them together, study them on your own. We'll go over these real quick here. Basic photography tips. For example, it talks about Aperture 5.6 allows you 2 times more light than Aperture 8 and 2 times more light than Aperture 4. At 1/250th of a second exposure time, the shutter will let in times more light than 1/500th of a second and 2 times less than 1/25th of a second, 125th of a second. How the quiz is going to be is you're going to have definitions like this, and then you're going to have the matching term that you're going to have to match it with. Make sense? So you have the definition and then the term. So as long as you've went through it a couple times, you should be okay. I always tell students on matching quizzes, answer the ones you know, boom, first, and then come back to the rest later, okay, and get them done. Aperture priority mode, you'll need to know that. Shutter priority mode, zoom, landscape photography, night photography, macro photography, nature photography, aperture, shutter speed, ISO, image resolution, image stabilization, image format, focal length, depth of field, white balance, exposure compensation, red eye removal, tripod, batteries, photographic filters. And so as you read those, read the definitions, and then next Tuesday we'll have a matching quiz. All right, and you'll do great. Now, you only get one shot at this one. It's the only one the entire semester you get one shot at something, and so just do your best. Don't freak out over it. You'll do good. Answer the ones you know first on Tuesday. We'll have the quiz as soon as you come to class on Tuesday, basically. It'll be online, and it won't take you a couple minutes to get it done. So any questions on that? You have till next Tuesday to study for that. Just terminology stuff, which you guys, if you're taking other classes, it's no-brainer. You have to do that all the time anyway. But that's the only one you have to do in here, so that's good. Get it out of the way. The next is the camera setting. Go and get your cameras out, because we're going to do this in just a second. In the camera setting lab, you're basically going to get your camera out and look at the dial on your camera, and you're going to submit below what it says, what modes you have on your dial. An example would be auto, aperture, ISO, movie, close-up, sports, PAM, TV. Yours is going to vary from this, but you'll actually write down 1 through whatever, what's on the dial of your camera. Okay, you can start wherever and end wherever, it doesn't matter. You don't have to start with auto if you don't want to. We'll go all the way around the dial. In the title, you put your name, and in the message, you're going to put the 1 through whatever with the name of that, or the letter or symbol, whatever it is that has on that. If it's a symbol and you don't know how to, just put whatever type of symbol. So if it's a symbol, put says TV symbol or whatever the case may be, and be TV mode. So if it's a symbol, most of those symbols, if you remember from last week when we talked about, as you turn the dial on your camera, it'll show you in the LCD viewer what that mode is as you're turning it. And so you can jot that down. So go ahead and do that. That shouldn't take too long to get that out of the way. Okay. So the digital photography quiz next week, you'll cover study for that, and then also your camera settings. Everybody's getting involved with that right now and doing that. Some discussion stuff. Okay, so the contrast exercise take home, let's open that up. In this exercise, you're going to walk around campus and other places in town or wherever you live. Take 3 pictures using each of the below settings that give itself to good contrast. We're going to talk about contrast tonight, so you'll understand more about it. After transferring files to the computer, you're going to name your files, Nature 1, Nature 2, Nature 3, People 1, so on and so forth. You're going to upload it to week 3 album or set and Flickr, and we'll go over in class next week. In fact, Tuesday, this is going to be the first critique that you're going to do on Tuesday of your own photos. You're going to critique your own photos next Tuesday after the quiz. And so basically you're going to focus on when you take these photos, and we'll discuss these terms tonight more. We've discussed them a little bit already, but ISO, white balance, auto and presets. Do not use manual white balance for this exercise. You will be doing manual white balance this semester. So here's the first setting that you're going to be taking the photo at. When I say setting, I mean place and the makeup of what you're taking a picture of. When I say setting, not camera setting, but setting as in this is what you're going to be taking a picture of. Nature is the first setting. So somewhere in nature, doesn't matter where it's at, somewhere in nature. You're going to put the location, describe the settings on your camera to make the contrast better, like maybe whatever white balance you set it at, auto white balance you set it at, what type of ISO setting it was. Choose the best contrast. So example for this one would be, say you did the gazebo, right, by the student center. You could have Nature 1, 200 for ISO, sunny white for the white balance, .jpg. Nature 2, 300 for ISO, shady white balance. And then notice on this one, I put best around. That's the best one I took. That's the one that looks the best out of the 3. And then Nature 3, 400 ISO, auto white balance. So there's my 3 pictures for nature. And I actually, hopefully as we go down here, these questions will be answered. You're having in your head right now, but I give a full example at the bottom here of what it should look like when you're done. Second setting, people gathering. People gathering could be at the mall, out in the parking lot, at your house, outside, wherever. Location again. Describe the settings that make you're on your camera to make better contrast. Again, white balance, ISO are the 2 we're focusing on. So example here is a people gathering location at Student Center. People 1, 200 ISO, sunny white balance. People 2, 300 ISO, shady white balance. That's the best one that I found on this one. And then people 3, 400 ISO, auto white balance. So that's the second setting, people gathering. The third setting is vehicles. Vehicles can be parking lot again. It could be the mall. It could be at your workplace, wherever. Just a group of vehicles you're going to take a photo of, a group of vehicles. You're going to choose 3 photos out of the photos you've taken that are the best. And you're going to choose one of those 3 as your best photo. So the vehicle location for this one is WTC parking lot right out here. Vehicles 1, 200 ISO setting, sunny white balance. That's the best one out of the 3 I took here. Vehicles 2, 300 ISO, shady white balance. And then vehicles 3, 400 ISO, auto white balance. The number 4 setting is other location. Any other location that you want to take photos at, the 4th setting. Again, focusing on white balance and ISO, choosing the best contrast. In this example, I put Cherryville Mall in the food court. Mall 1, 2, and 3, all different ISOs, and all of them were auto white balance. The middle one was the best. So when you submit it, the exact example of what I want is the very first link in the submission is going to be your Flickr link, right? To your set or to your main page is fine too, because some of you are doing that, and I told you you could do that. Then breakdown of nature location, and then all three pictures, which one's the best, people gathering, all three pictures, which one's the best, vehicle location, all three pictures, which one's the best, and then other, all three, which one's the best. You'll submit a name here, and everything you see up here from week 3 down is going to be submitted here in the message. Make sense? So what I suggest is, because it's going to take a while to probably type all that in, is type it in a separate document like Notepad or something, and then paste it when you're done. Pretty easy breezy, right? Now granted, when you're taking pictures, you're like, so I only take 3 pictures per setting? No, you might take 20 pictures per setting, but you're going to pick 3, the top 3, and you're going to choose one of those 3 that you like the best. And on Tuesday of next week, you're going to actually explain to me, and nobody else is going to see this critique next week, you're going to explain to me why you like that the best, why you chose that as the best contrast. And again, like we've already talked about, what you think in your eye is good contrast might be a little different than your neighbor. And that's fine. Just as long as you know why you like it, and they're using terminology we're going over in here to make that argument. Does that make sense? Some of you see colors different than others too, by the way. In fact, everybody in here sees colors a little bit different. Do you know that? Every person sees colors a little different. Hello. Hi. And so make sure that you follow the directions. You can help each other as always. A question students have on this assignment, and generally this one falls on the week where we have employee development training. And so your group thing we normally do on Thursday, we go out in groups. You can still do that if you want to, with this assignment if you wanted to make it, you know. A lot of you really emailed me over the weekend and said you had a lot of fun last week. Some of you had too much fun last week. Yeah. Okay.
We had a good time.
If you wanted to get with your group and knock this out quickly, you can do that if you wanted to get together. I'm not going to keep you all the whole session tonight. I'll fly through the notes pretty quick. So after tonight, if you didn't have a class afterwards, you wanted to knock some of these out, maybe 2 or 3 of them or whatever, knock them out as a group, you can do that if you want to. You don't have to, but I'm just saying you can. Because I think working in your groups builds a little cohesive group amongst you guys, 3 or 4 of you that go out every time. And then also you can share tips and tricks with each other and things like that. And so I think it's helpful. And you guys have told me it's helpful. So I do recommend doing that if you want to. You don't have to do that. It's up to you guys to meet about that and to figure out if you want to do that or not. So any questions on the contrast exercise? Okay. Now I'm going to shift gears to the 2 sections we're going to go over. One is exposure, contrast, and then the second is leading lines and rule of thirds. Exposure, contrast, and leading lines and rule of thirds. Okay, the first is exposure and the differences of exposure. I really worked my computer over last time, so I don't think I'll be able to do this. So I might just switch off of it. I think I will. Bless you.
Thank you.
You guys can watch on the overhead here. Let me bring the other one up while I'm here. So we're going to do that in a second, which is the leading lines. All right. Go full screen. Okay, we talked about exposure a little bit already, but this whole presentation is on specifically how to get the best exposure possible with your photo. Light is good, all right, when it comes to photos, and exposure is basically the amount of light exposed to a film or image sensor. In our case, when I first started taking photos, it was film, but in our case tonight and this semester, we're talking about the image sensor. And remember, we talked about last week, the difference between camera types all comes down to the sensor. You can have the same megapixels in all these different models, but the sensor makes or breaks the image quality, okay? What it does with that light that comes in and that photo that comes in. So it's controlled by film speed and film and image sensor sensitivity and digital cameras. It's also controlled by shutter speed and aperture. Amount of exposure is dependent upon the sensitivity of the capturing medium. In our case, the image sensor itself. So whether you've got it from a point to shoot to an SLR, that sensitivity is crucial to exposure. Here's an example of different ISO and aperture settings. Let's look at these real quick. You've got on the left a 1.3 shutter speed, the right 15-second shutter speed. What's the difference going left to right?
Brighter.
It's brighter. And it's brighter because the shutter speed is, you'll notice 1.3 on the left, 15 seconds on the right, so it's slower going more to the right, meaning more light's going to come in, so you're going to get more exposure, okay? More exposure, the longer the shutter is open. Exposure can make or break a picture. I always tell students, Photoshop does some cool stuff, and other apps like we're going to be using Pixlr in here, it'll do some cool things to your image, but you cannot ever make it better than what you took it. You can't make it better as far as light quality, okay? Anything you manipulate a photo will degrade the pixels of that photo somewhat, in some way, in some fashion. So you want the best light possible when you take that image that you can. There will be instances where that's not possible. You're going to do your best to get the best settings you can using ISO and aperture, white balance like we're going to do this week. But you want to try your best you can to get the exposure because it can change the appearance dramatically of the picture. So here we have on your cameras, if you look at your cameras, you're going to have a button on your camera somewhere. It might be on the LCD, it might be on a button itself. It basically looks like a plus and minus button, okay? Some of yours will look like this, circle. Some of you look like this. It's all different effects. But anyway, it's the same concept. Plus or minus is what it's doing here is it's plus or minusing the exposure ratio of that camera. Starting in the upper left corner is a -1, which makes it darker. 0 is supposed to be what it actually looks like outside or inside whenever the photo is being taken at. It's not always the case. And then +1, the more positive you get, the more exposure is given in, more light is let in. But just the danger here, the more plus you go, the more degradation of pixels you get. The more minus you go, the more darker that photo gets, and it's pretty either way. If you go to extreme on either spectrum, the photo is pretty well worthless as far as recovering, okay? So you want to try to get as best quality contrast as possible that very first photo. And there is a lab, a take-home lab we're going to do, I believe it might be next week or week after, where you use specifically just the minus and plus contrast button on your exposure button on your cameras. So histograms. Most of your picture cameras will have, your digital cameras will have a histogram. Most of you that have taken Photoshop have used histograms a lot for leveling. Well, you generally have, like I said, point and shoot to SLR, have this already on your camera. You just maybe have never used it. You might look to your manual to see if it's how you turn it on. Every camera is going to be a little different. But what it is, and that's supposed to be my opinion, instead of opine. In my opinion, the histogram is one of the most important features of the camera because it's kind of like a taking a blueprint of a house and buying that blueprint or developing it with an architecture before you build it. It's a blueprint before you take the photo. You see this in the LCD viewer before you take it. You can actually view this histogram. I think I've already mentioned not using the LCD. I do use the LCD when it's in bad lighting, where I know I'm going to need to use that histogram to trust, because I can't trust my eyes maybe in a situation. And so histograms also, by the way, on some of your viewfinders, you'll be able to view them through the viewfinder as well, not just the LCD screen on some of your cameras. If you don't have this, it's okay, but we're going to talk about what the histogram is good for here. So a histogram is a graphical representation of the amount of light and darkness in your picture. Okay? It's a graphical representation, kind of like an EKG is of your heart, to determine the heartbeat and the health of your heart. It's the health of your picture here of where the light and darkness is. We're going to break it down here in just a second even further. So you've got your shadows, your midtones, and your highlights of all photos. Then you've got your tonal range, which is in this range right here. Pixel number here. And then 0 to 25 is the light range of darkness, from whiteness to blackness. Okay? Each square represents a pixel of brightness. Okay? Every square in here represents a pixel of brightness. The histogram displays every pixel collected. 0 is pure black. 255 is pure white. And if you, like I said, have played with Photoshop, you've seen this maybe in leveling, where you can see the histogram show up in a photo that you're manipulating. In Photoshop, a lot of times, if this was a histogram, I would take the slider and slide it over here to the left a little bit, and it would make that picture brighter. If I started here and went to the right, it would make it darker. Okay? This one here, though, actually, as far as histogram goes, is a really good histogram. You want it pretty much peaking like this right here, with not much jaggedness, which you'll see in a second. Jaggedy edges, you don't want much jaggedy edges. So you want kind of like a mountain type of effect on that histogram. Tonal range is where you find most of the pixels, and this has really good tonal range. It's the whole width of the histogram. Most of your cameras actually have built into it facial recognition. So most of your cameras do a pretty good job today of getting tonal ranges fairly well. Okay? Your picture well by looking at the histogram. There's no perfect histogram. This one here actually shows you, this picture actually shows you the breakdown of the histogram, which is really cool. So we'll start here on the left side. Right around here is where that histogram is coming from, this dark part of the mountain here, the rocks. Right up here, a little bit lighter, but jaggedy. Right up here. There, there, and there. Okay? Now if you look at it this way, it's kind of like a reverse model. It's kind of taking what you're actually seeing here and flipping it down, is what it actually looks like, if you can think of it that way. Your eye does the same thing as a histogram will do. Your eye brings in light and data, and your eye will also fill in stuff that's maybe not there sometimes too, to make up. Have you ever thought you saw something out of the corner of your eye? It wasn't really there. Your eye made it up. Your mind made it up and filled in the blanks. Same with histograms. The histogram's all different than your eye is. It's pure data. There's no hiding. It is what it is. And so histograms are definitely good. If you know how to read them, which you'll learn here, the best type of histogram. This is an average one here. It's not the best of best, but it's average. It's a good one. Plenty of midtones. Ideal subject because the camera can get most of the tones. Most camera meters will have no problem reading this. What that means is some of your cameras will not let you take a picture if it's out of the tonal range of midtones. It won't let you push the button all the way down. It won't let you do it on auto mode. On manual mode it will, but if you take your photos in auto mode like we're still doing right now, and you don't have the right metering for that image, light-wise and modal-wise on midtones, it won't let you push a button all the way down. It'll say, nope, little red button, little red flash, not good enough. Anybody had that happen on your camera before? Auto setting, true auto setting and bad lighting, most cameras do that today. It'll flash red and say more light, turn your flash on maybe, then you can take it, okay? And that's true auto mode for your cameras. And it uses a histogram to determine that, by the way. Okay, now we're going into low key and high key of histograms, and you'll see the difference here. On the left side, you've got a Dalmatian. Background is white sand. So a lot of light, midday probably this was taken. So you'll notice that the histogram is really peaked to the right, and it's high. Very bright, almost whitewashed effect, okay? Low key, not much light coming in this room. You got the bars of the door there. So you got high key and low key. Now, will there be instances where you want this type of effect in a photo? Definitely, okay? But you just need to know the difference of the histogram, what you're going to get when you're looking at that through your viewfinder. This one here, underexposed histogram. Go back, high key, underexposed. Now, when you get to underexposed, the difference between this one here, high key, and underexposed, you'll notice a jaggedness start happening here in the histogram. Anytime you see a jagged edge of a histogram, that's when you're going to see high degradation of pixels, either too bright or too dark. It's going to wash it out. Overexposed has clipped images, okay, clipped highlights. And what that means is there's actually clipped highlights of the bars not showing up here in the light because it's so overexposed. The bars aren't even showing up where they should show up because it's so overexposed. It'll clip the image. Clipped highlights can never be recovered. This is where I'm going back to what I said earlier. So spend time this week on understanding with your camera, and every camera is a little different here, on the best contrast for your settings. Okay, specifically ISO and specifically white balance you're going to focus on this week, which we'll talk about more in a second. But here's the clipped highlights that'll never be recovered again. Now contrast. Contrast is a measured difference in the brightness between light and dark areas in a scene. So the top one's low contrast. It's kind of dull and boring. High contrast is sharp and edgy. Okay? That's the difference. You also don't want to play too much with contrast on your camera and your histogram because it can cause a lot of choppiness or a lot of dullness. Just tend to be flat or dull looking in low contrast, and they tend to be more intense, and I like to call them sharp on the right side with high contrast. You'll notice the difference in the peak of the valley is just on the high contrast, it's wider than the low contrast. Okay? And remember, a more healthy histogram, and this is a very crude example, but one you can pretty much live by on histograms, is something like that. Now, it's never going to look that smooth, by the way, but that's what you're shooting for. Okay? That's what you're shooting for. Good facial range. You got your good mid, low, and high ranges that are good. It's got fairly good pixels. And so that's what you want to look for and shoot for in most of your histograms before you take the picture. That's what you're shooting for. So in this example here, we've got three histograms, a top, middle, and bottom histogram. And they've broken down the image on all three. The top, you'll notice a lot of jagged, pretty straight across, flat-lined almost. There's not much to this. There's not much mid-tones, high tones, neutral tones. It's just flat. Okay? Not a lot of light, really, in this. Middle part, a little better, not too bad. The bottom one, really bad. It's clipped some areas here actually in the bottom. Middle one's the best out of the three. Not that great, but it's the best out of the three. So in low contrast, again, things seem to be dull and flat looking. Pictures taken during a fog maybe. High contrast, pictures tend to be more intense, taken maybe during high noon outside. So we have a progression of histograms as far as where they could look on a histogram, different types that they could look like. Top, middle, bottom. So you know, top plus the middle plus the bottom equals that, all put together in the histogram. And again, that's not a terrible histogram, but it's worse than average. I'd say it's worse than average. That bottom left one is worse than average. A lot of contrast, a lot of low lighting. So here we have an example of a tree, fairly nice background here. Countryside with a nice fence line, has a fairly good depth of circumference here of the image, puts a lot of depth into it. This one here, you'll notice has a big peak there on the left and a little on the right. Still not a bad histogram though. Still not too bad. It's got pretty good lighting in that. Again, you're not going to get perfect what's on the board. It's never going to get that like that. Okay, this is a monarch moth, I believe, looking over the top of it, shooting down from the camera. This one, pretty good representation of a histogram. Mostly way in the middle here. So Goldilocks and the three histograms. Let's go over that. Top left, too dark, underexposed. Bottom left, too light, underexposed, overexposed. And right here, just right, correct exposure. Okay? So again, you want it towards the middle there? Yes.
So you really only want one peak?
Yeah, for the well, no, you can have two peaks, you just want the majority of it to be towards the middle of the histogram. The reason that one had two peaks was you had the tree and then you had the valley. So you had two peaks. The tree was one little peak here, and then the tree was a big peak here, and then there was a little valley up here that made it a little peak. So as long as it's centered towards the middle, you're good. And there's not a lot of choppiness like here, and it's not way to the left or way to the right. What's wrong with this one? You guys help me here. You do some talking. What's wrong with this one? What kind of setting is this? What kind of picture setting? Anybody? Is it a bright sunshiny day there?
No, it's foggy.
Foggy. So when you get fog, you're going to get a bad histogram. You're going to get bad lighting, and it's going to be dull. Now, will there be images you see sometimes that are pretty cool taken in fog? Definitely. And so there's always exceptions for everything in every rule. Okay, always exceptions. And so don't get me wrong when I go over a rule or something I suggest. There's always exceptions to everything, or there might be reasons why you'd want that type of effect in an image. Does that make sense? There's always going to be reasons why you might want it. This one here, what time of day or what kind of setting we looking at? Forget the histogram right now. What is this looking at? What do you feel like, and what's the weather like here in this picture? Just by looking at it.
Damp.
Damp? Okay. What about back in here? What do you think of when you see back in this area here?
Foggy or cloudy.
Foggy and cloudy, overcast. Okay. You can see the brush there in the front, but not much beyond it. So you can imagine the histogram is not going to be that great. The lighting is not going to be that great because of that. It's peaked here towards the right and towards the left, both on this one. What about this one? What's wrong with this one? Is this an over or underexposed image?
I think it's overexposed.
How do you know it's over? Why do you know it's over?
It looks.
Yeah, go ahead and say it. There's no wrong answer.
It looks too bright. It looks too
Yeah.
like over. It's just. I don't like the flash was on, it's just, it's not right, it's not true to color.
Right, it almost looks like a stencil, right? Like an image, like a pencil stencil type of thing. And again, it might be a cool effect sometimes, but overall, rule-wise, bad contrast, and it's going to be a very high contrast, washed out, or really not washed out, but a sharp type of image, almost like a stencil type. What about this one? Is that a good one or a bad one? Low contrast.
Too dark.
Everything's shoved to the left on the
You can see what
histogram.
you're looking at,
Where's this coming from?
that little bit of light.
Yep, this is it right here. Everything else is pretty well low contrast, dark, and so go to the next one. What about this one? I'm actually turn the light off on this one. I think that was pretty cool.
I think it's a cool picture.
It's a cool picture, but it's low contrast.
Low contrast, but I like the effect. It kind of reminds me of like, you know, I don't know, E.T., which that really ages me probably. E.T. coming over the moon
Yeah.
with the bicycle. In fact, they had a couple scenes like that with it. So, good. Let's keep going on. What about this one? What type of weather is this taken at?
Winter.
Winter.
Winter, maybe a whitewash snow hitting the tree. It's really weighed down. We can see this in Rockford a lot during the winter months.
It looked really cool if it had more contrast.
Yep. It's going to be all whitewashed. Everything's to the right of that histogram here. What about this one? You've taken pictures like this, right?
Yeah.
People been outside, no light, but your flash.
Yeah.
So the person here, actually lighting-wise, pretty good. Flesh tones, tonal tones are good. Even this pole here is good, but everything else beyond it is dark. So this right here, actually, that I'm highlighting, is right in here. Everything else is the darkness. Okay, let's break it down to actual settings here into the histograms. And this one, you notice everything's to the left, which makes it either lighter or darker of an image. If it's to the left. Lighter or darker contrast. It's going to be darker. Let's look at the breakdown of the camera settings. Shutter speed is 1/180th of a second, 180th of a second. Aperture 2.8 and ISO 50. What can we do? What one of these settings, there's more than one by the way, that we could change to bring more light into this image?
Any one of them.
Let's start with one.
Well, the
Speed up the
ISO,
shutter, slow down the shutter.
Well, you would want to slow down the shutter,
Okay, what else could we do? Something
higher
else.
the aperture, and higher the ISO.
Higher the ISO, good. So we could slow the shutter speed down. We could make the ISO higher. We could also play with the aperture to allow the opening to be more, to bring in more lighting. Okay, this next one, shutter speed 1/60th of a second, aperture 2.8 again, ISO 200. What are some things we can do with ISO on this one? Bring it up or down?
Down.
Down.
Bring it down, it's too high. In an outdoor setting, you never want ISO on midday to be over 50 probably, in an outdoor light setting. Some of your cameras don't go lower than 100, so you don't want to go lower than 100, but some of your cameras can go down to 50. So what else could we change to make this darker, or not as much light?
The shutter speed.
Shutter speed, we could actually make it faster. It's fairly slow shutter speed. And you can actually see this one here is peaking to the right, meaning it's going to be more whitewashed and it's jaggedy, which would make a lot of choppiness. And also, if you notice, there's data missing from the image. There's parts of that image you can't even see what's there. It's clipped images that can be recovered later or can't be recovered. They can't, they're gone.
They're clipped, they can't.
I mean, you can copy and paste it from another image, but it's not going to be that image. Okay? And so it's going to be clipped forever. What about this one? We have a shutter speed here of 1/160th of a second, aperture f8, ISO 200. Let's focus on aperture on this one. What can we do with the aperture to make this a better image, a better histogram. Remember, higher f-stop means what? Bigger hole or smaller hole for the light to go through. Right. So what can we do with the aperture?
Lower it, make it smaller.
We can make it smaller to where we could, which would actually be a bigger number actually, to make it smaller.
Well, how would you get, like, when you want a slower shutter speed so you could, like, get more detail? Because you don't, can't see really the detail of the plants that much.
Well, actually with this one, the shutter speed's not the issue, it's the ISO. You can actually bump it up some more, and then also the f-stop is going to need to be manipulated in the aperture. Shutter speed's not the culprit on this one, it would be the aperture and ISO. Okay, because there's really not much going on this. Pretty static. Good. What about this one? Shutter speed 1/100th per second, f2.8, and ISO is unknown. Choppiness a little bit on the histogram. Is it a little too light or a little too dark in your estimation? Or is it just right? A little dark maybe. Huh? Anybody have a suggestion to make it a tad bit lighter? Just a little bit lighter, not much. Which one of those three settings, somebody hasn't answered yet, which one of these three settings would you change, or could you change? All at once, please. Anybody? No. Could we make the shutter speed faster or slower to bring in more light?
Slower.
Slower, good. We don't know what the ISO is, but what could we do with the ISO to make it lighter? Go up or down? Increase it or decrease it? Increase it. With the f-stop, would we want that f-stop? Remember, the higher the f-stop, the smaller the hole, the lower the f-stop, the larger the hole, meaning more light coming in. So which one would we want? Lower. Very good. Okay. So again, each one of your cameras is going to be different when you're playing with these settings and when you're playing with these photos. And the only way you're going to learn it is to do it and take your camera out and actually practice with it. And that's what we're going to start doing this week. Yes?
The slower the shutter speed, the brighter the picture, right? Is that what you're saying?
The slower the shutter speed is going to allow more light into the image. Correct. Yep. And then lastly on this is dynamic range. Range at which a camera can record relative brightness and darkness. The dynamic range of digital cameras are not that big compared to film. Film had a lot of dynamic range. Okay, so that's exposure. I'm going to shift gears over to the next one, which is contrast. In a recent photography talk column, Peter Eisenberg discussed developing awareness of light and its relationship of subjects in a photograph. Light and shadow become integral parts of composition. When skillfully integrated and incorporated, should be your first consideration of setting up a photograph. It's usually a student's last consideration is lighting. You guys are generally more concerned with what it looks like in the viewfinder, which is important, but what's most important is understanding light and the importance of light. When lighting conditions have been evaluated and the camera position is chosen, like this week you guys are focusing exclusively on your white balance, and you're using the auto setting of your camera and the white balance settings only. That's it. And your ISO, I'm sorry. ISO, auto, and white balance settings. And just with those three, you can actually do a lot with photography and learning lighting. So when lighting conditions have been evaluated, the camera position chosen to take best advantage of light, subject relationship, the next step is composing the photograph, which we learned a little bit about this already, which is called what? It's a rule of thirds. Remember, the rule of thirds is the concept of an image, framing an image in a box that's split up like a tic-tac-toe board, basically. And you want your image, your main subjects, to be these four focal points, okay? Which by nature, human nature, when you first start taking photos, you want to put your subject here. You don't want to do that anymore. You want to shove it to the upper right, left, bottom right area of the image. Make sense? One of these 4 focal areas. Not all the way in the center, but one of the kind of off center. Okay? So, composing a photograph is essentially an editing process, deciding what to leave in and what to leave out. There's a basic accepted criteria for good composition that, when applied, will help you achieve. This next paragraph, the next few sentences, is real important to understand composition and lighting and taking a real good look at how you take photos up to this point and how you'll learn to do it differently. When these things are applied, you'll achieve visual harmony and dynamic tension. Let me stop on those 2 terms right there, visual harmony and dynamic tension. Visual harmony and dynamic tension is a feeling. It is a term here, but you feel it. When you see an image that brings emotion, whether it be a mother and a child, a fireman bringing a baby out of a building, we've all seen the images maybe of children that are hungry and they're needing food. Those inspire a visual harmony, but also a tension. The tension is the hunger part. It's not actual seen, it's felt. And so when you take a picture, you're looking at stuff to kind of work together, but cause some tension, meaning you want the viewer to think beyond the image, right? You want the viewer to think beyond the image. You want it to stick in their mind. Like a runner on a beach running off of the image to the right of the image gives kind of a motion to the image. You're thinking when you see the image, what's beyond that photo that they're running to? You don't see it, but you're thinking it, okay? So you want some type of tension there, dynamic tension, that the user is wanting to fill in and wanting to see beyond what's been taken. So that's the trick of the photographer, is to take a picture that doesn't encompass everything in the entire scene. You encompass things that bring harmony, but yet tension, meaning people want to see more. They want to fill in the blanks, basically. So you follow the rules of composition. If you faithfully follow all the rules of composition, will not necessarily culminate in a good photograph. The rules are intended just as guidelines. Like I said earlier, all the stuff we go over in here, there's always going to be exceptions to rules, always. And where that exception in my mind comes in, that breaks a regular, normal photograph to an exceptional one, is creativity, thinking out of the box, and doing something because it feels right. Taking a picture because it feels right. You might not know at the time what that feeling is, but it feels right. Why it feels right at the time, you might not know even, but you know it does. The rules are intended more as a guideline than a strict dogma, but they'll help you design a well-balanced image that's pleasing to the eye. While it may be the subject that initially attracts the viewers to stop and look, it's the artistry of the composition that holds them together and everything there. And here's some basic elements that's going to help you. I'm not going to go over the whole PDF, just some basic elements here. First is strong focal point. You've got a person on a ledge. Okay? That's what's going to draw the viewer possibly to that image. But notice everything around the image. The structure of the tree, the mountains, beyond the mountains where she's standing. It's all structured beautifully. It all harmonizes, flows together. Nothing's out of place. You maybe think of what's beyond this, what's over here, what's over here, what's down here. Okay, but the subject is highlighted. It says here it's usually best to have one subject as the main focal point, because if a photograph is successful at telling one story, the main subject can be one object or several. And you may even decide to include a secondary object. You'll learn this semester, meaning including an object between the camera and the person or object will bring depth to that photo. Whatever that, it might be a tree limb, it might be whatever in between you and the main object can bring depth. In my mind, this image of this tree. He could have focused in just on this, but he actually brought the tree in. The tree actually brings some dimension to that entire photo. Make sure nothing distracts from the focal point. Lacking a strong center of interest forces a viewer to search for something to observe. Eyes seeking a resting place. Always giving the focal point sufficient place to look at. Because people will focus in. You want the person, you want to basically make a photo where they're going to focus in on the focal point. Rule of thirds, we've already went over that. I'll just make mention here on this paragraph here, on this to create movement line. To create movement in a photograph and avoid the static bullseye composition, meaning right in the center, use the rule of thirds as a guideline to off-center placement of your subject. And that's something you just learn by doing, okay? You'll learn by doing. You just focus on these 4 points, focal points. Here's a trick too on portraits of people. If you're taking portraits of people, you want the eyes to intersect right around there on the rule of thirds, generally. I like this image right here. Okay. What was the photographer's focal point of this image, do you think? You first look at this image. What is the main object that you see that draws your eye first to this image? And it might be different for everybody, by the way, or half and half, whatever. What's the first thing your eyes focus on in this image?
The ripples in the sand.
Ripples in the sand. Does anybody focus on the pier image rock on the upper right corner first? Anybody see that one first? It just depends. Some people will see that first. It just depends on you. But yeah, ripples are generally most what people see. The bottom left quadrant actually right here. Right in there. Next is leading lines. This is important and we're going to be done. Leading lines. Another compositional technique to create energy and movement in a photograph is the use of leading lines. Whether they're graceful curves, like we just saw in the rippling of the sand, or dynamic diagonals, all lines should lead the viewer's focus point to the focal point. Be careful to use the use of leading lines. They can also work against you by directing the eye away from the subject, or if the line divides the photograph into two, leading them outside of the image. So here's a few things on lines. Let the lines in your composition decide if the scene should be shot horizontally, physically, or vertically. Up to this point, most of you have taken cameras or photos more than likely that have been horizontal, not vertical. What I mean by that is you've been taking this type and not this type. This is maybe your focus point thus far by default. So whatever the lines are in the image will lead you to the horizontal or vertical camera orientation. Second, be aware of the white or light areas of the composition. The viewer's eyes will always go to the brightest part of the scene. So eliminate any bright spots that will pull attention away from the main subject. Look for repetition of shapes and textures. Patterns create rhythm and motion. Compose boldly using sweeping dialogue, diagonal lines. Long horizontal lines can also be static and visually boring. Conversely, diagonal lines also add visual energy. Change camera angle to pivot prevailing lines so they don't run parallel to the top edges of the frame. I wanted to go up to this one again, which I think is good as far as, it's not a straight line, but it is an example of using lines. Another one is this here, this image here. When you look at this image, where does your eye focus on first? And we'll end on that image actually.
Rocks at the bottom.
Okay, how many raises your hand that says your eyes are focused in this area of the image first? This image? 2 people? How many is focused here? This area here? How many is focused on the top? Somewhere in the top area. Okay? So most of you is actually in this area here. But there is some leading lines in this image actually. One is this right here, the natural line of the water. Here, there's also lines here. So this is actual natural lines. It actually makes the picture look ongoing and gives it movement. The lines give it movement. Okay? And you would want that. You wouldn't want to take the image to where you're sitting there and here's the water on both sides and you're taking the picture from this view because you can see everything. There's no hiding of anything. When you take the image like it's taken there, you've got the water flowing outside of both views of the focal point to where it gives movement. The lines actually give movement to the photo. Okay? So, let's add this to your take home. Going to actually, for your take home, focus on ISO setting on your camera, the white balance settings of your camera, which is auto and presets. Do not use a manual one yet this week. All of your cameras will have a white balance setting like sunny, cloudy, rainy, fireworks, whatever, inside, fluorescent, all different types of settings your white balance will have. Play with the white balance settings that you have on your camera. Play with the ISO settings. Remember, if it's a dark room or a darker area, you're going to want a higher ISO. If it's a lighter room or very light, you want a lower ISO. When it comes to white balance, for your auto settings on white balance, these you experiment with because more than likely you've not even played with these yet or not too much. So before you get to the manual, I want you to experiment this week with all of your white balance settings because like in this room here, for white balance, it could actually be overcast that would look good possibly. Okay? Don't know. Depends on your camera and the auto setting. And so auto setting, white balance, and you guys, some will have more than others, and then the ISO setting. You're going to take, say you take 10 pictures per setting that I've given you. You're going to choose the top 3, and out of those 3, you're going to put to the right of it in parentheses like I did in the example, the best one in your mind of exposure out of those 3. Then on Tuesday when you guys come to class, you're going to have to, first of all, take a real hard quiz, which is not going to be hard at all. It's going to be matching. It'll be easy. Just go over that Word document in week 3. You'll be fine. And right after the quiz, we're going to go into your first critique, and you're going to critique yourself. I'm going to list of 5 questions per photo that you're going to critique yourself on, and you're going to give me explanation and examples of why you like this, and give me an example of why you like it, and give me a description of why you like it in your own words. And then we'll go on into next week's discussion on Tuesday. Let's jump ahead just a little bit here. Week 4. We're going into week 4 into a lot of good stuff. One is a beginner photography card, which you might have jumped ahead and looked at already. Has a lot of cool tips and tricks for card setting or for settings of your camera. We have an in-class settings lab we'll be doing on Tuesday. The ISO take-home you can do as a group next Thursday. And then the contact sheet, we'll go over that as well, create contact sheet. Did I already tell you guys to get Picasa at home? Did I tell you guys that? I think I have. Picasa, the Google product, just Google Picasa because you will be using Picasa to do certain things like create a contact sheet. Unless you have Photoshop at home, you can use that as well, but you don't need Photoshop. You can use Picasa to do this assignment. So iPhoto or Picasa or Photoshop, either one. And then the quiz we'll take next Tuesday. And this is a little cheat sheet camera bag version that you can print out or put on your phone that has cheat sheets for camera settings. So, any questions? Yes?
So we don't have any pictures in week 2 of our Flickr.
Yes, you do. You had the lab you did last Thursday that you guys did
I
together.
thought you said to put that in week 1.
No? No, it's in week 2, I believe. Yeah, week 2, we go into week 2. The assignment number 2 for classmates.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, you're
It
right.
says week 1.
Putting in week 1. You're right.
That's what I
Yep. So that's what we had for week 1
Okay,
or week
another
2.
question. So we're taking at least 12 pictures, right? We're taking with each location, we're taking 3 or more pictures.
Yeah, I know you guys came in a little bit late, right? I spent about 10 minutes just going over the take home. And so if you want to watch that later, that would be good because I went over in detail exactly what I'm looking for your take home. And I did tell them, I don't know if you're here for that, I did tell them about work that you can work in groups for the take home as well.
Okay.
Okay?
So,
Yes.
Can
Sorry,
we,
I'll
for
come
this
back.
project, can we use any shooting setting as long as it's
I think so.
presets for white balance?
Yes, definitely. Yep, you're right. What was your other question?
So for the white balance, do you want us to use auto? Because you had auto in the 3 examples that you had.
This is the best
4
quality.
examples. You had,
They're all auto. The white balances are all auto. It's either going to be like sunny, shady,
Right.
whatever.
what says auto?
Yeah, auto's auto. Because you guys have just an auto white balance setting by default. And then you have other white balance settings that are auto as well, which would be
Oh,
shady,
Okay.
sunny,
Okay,
stuff like
but you
that.
want us to use one auto?
You can use whatever you want to. You don't have to do, I just give you an example.
Okay.
On the pictures I took, what made the best contrast on those pictures I took. So it depends on the setting you're at, what white balance you're going to choose, and also what ISO you're going to choose.
So we want to choose different ones and then pick the best in each.
Correct.
Okay.
So you might take 10 photos per setting, right? You'll choose the top 3. Out of those 3, you'll choose the one that's the best and put a little best beside it. And I actually have in the assignment folder, I have detailed example at the bottom on this contrast exercise of what it should look like when you submit it. Okay? Any other questions? Okay. Good job, guys. Thanks for, everybody knows we're meeting here, right, from now on, right? You got that down in your mind? Write it down, jot it down somewhere, so.
Got it
Cool.
down.
All right. See ya.